Inspector Theodore Blackwood had shut down 37 mines in 6 months, earning the hatred of every mining company in Colorado Territory and the nickname the Mine Killer from newspapers across the West. But when the greatest mining disaster in American history was prevented by his seemingly destructive actions, the people realized that the man they called a saboteur had actually been conducting the most important rescue operation in frontier history. Theodore Blackwood had arrived in Colorado Territory in the spring of 1884 as the newly appointed territorial mining inspector, carrying credentials from the United States Geological Survey and a reputation as one of the most thorough and knowledgeable mining engineers in the country. At 43 years old, Theodore possessed a rare combination of practical mining experience and advanced scientific education that made him uniquely qualified to assess the safety and viability of mining operations in one of America's most productive mineral extraction regions. Colorado Territory in the 1880s was experiencing an unprecedented mining boom that had transformed the region from a sparsely populated frontier into one of the most economically important areas in the American West. Gold discoveries in the 1850s have been followed by massive silver strikes that brought tens of thousands of prospectors, miners, and support workers to communities like Denver, Boulder, and Leadville. The territorial government was eager to maximize mining production while ensuring that operations met basic safety standards that would protect workers and prevent disasters that could damage the region's reputation and economic prospects. Theodore's appointment as territorial mining inspector was seen as a positive development by both mining companies and worker advocacy groups. His background included 15 years of practical mining experience in Pennsylvania coal mines, followed by advanced engineering studies at the Colorado School of Mines and specialized training in geological assessment techniques that were considered cutting-edge for the 1880s. Mine owners expected him to provide the technical expertise needed to maximize extraction efficiency, while workers hoped that his safety focus would reduce the high injury and death rates that characterized frontier mining operations. Theodore's first months on the job seemed to confirm these positive expectations. He conducted thorough inspections of major mining operations throughout the territory, providing detailed technical reports that helped companies improve their extraction methods and safety procedures. His recommendations led to the installation of better ventilation systems, improved structural supports, and enhanced emergency evacuation procedures that immediately reduced accident rates in the mines he inspected. But everything changed in October 1884, when Theodore began receiving reports of unusual seismic activity throughout the Colorado mining region. Small earthquakes that had previously been attributed to normal mining operations were increasing in frequency and intensity, occurring in patterns that didn't match the typical disturbances caused by excavation work. More troubling were reports from experienced miners who described hearing strange sounds underground, deep groaning and cracking noises that seemed to come from far below the mining tunnels themselves. Theodore's investigation of these reports led him to a shocking discovery that would change his understanding of the entire Colorado mining region. Using seismic measuring equipment that he had acquired through his connections at the Geological Survey, Theodore began conducting systematic underground surveys that revealed a geological situation far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The mountain ranges that contained Colorado's richest mineral deposits were sitting on top of a vast network of underground caverns and unstable rock formations that had been weakened by decades of intensive mining activity. The constant blasting, excavation, and tunnel construction that characterized large-scale mining operations had gradually undermined the structural integrity of the entire region, creating a situation where a single major collapse could trigger a chain reaction that would destroy hundreds of square miles of mining territory. Theodore's analysis indicated that the underground cavern system was approaching a critical point of structural failure. The weight of the mountains above, combined with the destabilizing effects of ongoing mining operations, had created enormous pressure on underground rock formations that were already weakened by natural geological processes. His calculations suggested that continued mining activity would inevitably trigger a catastrophic collapse that could kill thousands of people and destroy the entire Colorado mining industry. The evidence Theodore gathered was overwhelming, but also difficult for non-experts to understand and accept. Seismic readings, geological core samples, and structural engineering calculations all pointed to the same conclusion. The Colorado mining region was essentially a geological time bomb that would explode if mining operations continued at their current intensity. But proving this to mining company executives and territorial officials who had massive financial investments in continued extraction proved to be nearly impossible. Theodore's attempts to present his findings through official channels met with skepticism, hostility, and accusations that he was either incompetent or corrupt. Mining company representatives argued that Theodore's concerns were based on theoretical models that didn't reflect the reality of practical mining operations. They pointed to the fact that mining had been conducted safely in the region for over 30 years without any major disasters, and they questioned whether Theodore's sophisticated measuring equipment was actually providing accurate information about underground conditions. Territorial officials were caught between Theodore's scientific warnings and the economic reality that mining revenue was essential to Colorado's development and statehood prospects. The mining industry employed over 50,000 people directly and supported hundreds of thousands more through related businesses and services. Shutting down mining operations based on Theodore's warnings would devastate the territorial economy and potentially prevent Colorado from achieving statehood for decades. Faced with official resistance to his warnings, Theodore made the most controversial decision of his career. He began using his authority as territorial mining inspector to systematically shut down mining operations throughout Colorado, citing immediate safety violations that required the suspension of all underground work until structural improvements could be implemented. Theodore's first target was the Consolidated Silver Mining Company's operation near Leadville, which employed over 800 miners and was one of the most profitable silver extraction operations in the territory. Theodore's inspection report cited numerous safety violations, including inadequate ventilation, insufficient structural supports, and dangerous excavation practices that posed immediate threats to worker safety. The company was ordered to cease all operations until these violations were corrected, a process that Theodore estimated would take at least 6 months. The closure of the consolidated operation sent shockwaves through the Colorado mining industry and territorial government. Company executives accused Theodore of exceeding his authority and demanded his immediate removal from office. Newspaper editorials condemned his actions as economically destructive and potentially treasonous to Colorado's statehood ambitions. Workers who lost their jobs due to the closure organized protests demanding that Theodore be fired and mining operations be resumed immediately. But Theodore was just getting started. Over the next 6 months, he conducted inspections of every major mining operation in Colorado territory, finding safety violations that required immediate suspension of operations in 37 separate mines. Each closure was documented with exhaustive technical reports that cited specific dangers to worker safety, but the cumulative effect was the complete shutdown of Colorado's mining industry. The economic impact of Theodore's actions was devastating. Tens of thousands of miners lost their jobs, forcing many families to leave Colorado in search of work in other territories. Mining equipment manufacturers, transportation companies, and support businesses throughout the region faced bankruptcy as their primary customer base disappeared overnight. Real estate values in mining communities plummeted as residents fled to areas with more stable economic prospects. Political pressure for Theodore's removal became overwhelming as territorial officials faced mounting criticism from both local residents and federal authorities who were concerned about the economic impact of the mining shutdowns. Newspaper editorials throughout the West condemned Theodore as either mentally unstable or secretly working for competing mining interests in other territories. Death threats became so frequent that Theodore required constant protection from territorial marshals. The situation reached a crisis point in March 1885, when the territorial governor announced that Theodore would be removed from office and that all mining operations would be permitted to resume immediately under the supervision of a new inspector who would focus on practical safety measures rather than theoretical geological concerns. Mining companies began making preparations to reopen their operations, and workers started returning to Colorado in anticipation of renewed employment opportunities. But on March 18, 1885, just 3 days before mining operations were scheduled to resume, Theodore's warnings were vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. A massive earthquake, measuring what would now be classified as 7.2 on the Richter scale, struck the Colorado mining region at 3:47 a.m., triggering exactly the kind of catastrophic geological collapse that Theodore had predicted. The earthquake's epicenter was located directly beneath the Consolidated Silver Mining Company's operation near Leadville, the first mine that Theodore had closed 6 months earlier. The underground cavern system that Theodore had identified collapsed completely, creating a sinkhole over 2 miles wide and 800 feet deep that swallowed the entire mining complex along with several square miles of surrounding territory. The geological chain reaction that followed was even more devastating than Theodore had predicted. Underground collapses spread throughout the mountain range, destroying mining tunnels and surface facilities across an area of over 200 square miles. Rivers were diverted, entire mountain peaks collapsed into the underground void, and geological formations that had existed for millions of years were completely destroyed in a matter of hours. But because Theodore had forced the closure of all mining operations in the affected area, not a single miner was underground when the disaster struck. The 37 mines that he had shut down would have contained approximately 12,000 workers during normal operations, all of whom would have been killed instantly if they had been working when the collapse occurred. The aftermath of the disaster completely transformed public perception of Theodore's actions. Newspaper editorials that had condemned him as a saboteur now praised him as a hero who had saved thousands of lives through his courage and scientific expertise. Mining company executives who had demanded his removal publicly apologized and credited him with preventing the greatest industrial disaster in American history. Workers whose jobs Theodore had eliminated organized ceremonies to honor the man who had sacrificed his career to protect their lives. Families throughout Colorado realized that Theodore's seemingly destructive actions had actually saved their fathers, husbands, and sons from certain death. The man who had been vilified as the mine killer was now celebrated as the savior of the Colorado mining community. The geological investigation that followed the disaster confirmed every aspect of Theodore's analysis. Federal scientists who examined the collapsed area found evidence of the exact underground conditions that Theodore had described in his reports. The seismic measuring equipment that had been dismissed as unreliable was shown to have provided accurate warnings that could have prevented the disaster if they had been heeded earlier. More importantly, the investigation revealed that Theodore's shutdown of mining operations had prevented not just the immediate loss of life, but also long-term environmental and economic devastation that would have affected the entire region for decades. The underground collapse had released toxic minerals and gases that would have poisoned water supplies and agricultural land throughout Colorado if mining operations had been active when the disaster occurred. The federal government's response to the disaster included a complete overhaul of mining safety regulations and inspection procedures throughout the American West. Theodore's methods for detecting underground geological instability became standard practice for mining operations, and his detailed reports were used as the foundation for new safety standards that prevented similar disasters in other mining regions. Theodore himself was appointed as the first director of the newly created Federal Mining Safety Administration, a position that allowed him to implement his geological assessment techniques on a national scale. His work over the next 20 years prevented dozens of potential mining disasters and saved countless lives through improved safety standards and early warning systems. The Colorado mining industry eventually recovered from the 1885 disaster, but under completely different operational principles that prioritized worker safety and environmental protection over maximum extraction rates. New mining techniques that Theodore helped develop allowed for continued mineral extraction while avoiding the geological instability that had led to the catastrophic collapse. Perhaps most importantly, Theodore's story became a powerful reminder that expertise and scientific knowledge sometimes require individuals to make unpopular decisions that may seem destructive in the short term, but serve essential protective functions in the long term. His willingness to accept personal and professional consequences for his actions demonstrated the courage required to prioritize human life over economic interests. The 37 mines that Theodore closed were never reopened, and the areas where they once operated were eventually designated as protected geological research sites. Memorial plaques at each location commemorate the miners whose lives were saved by Theodore's controversial decision to shut down operations based on scientific evidence that others were unwilling to accept. Theodore's detailed journals and technical reports became essential resources for geological research and mining safety education. His methods for detecting underground instability were taught in engineering schools throughout the country, and his example inspired generations of safety inspectors to prioritize worker protection over industry pressure and political considerations. The transformation of Theodore's reputation from villain to hero illustrated the complex relationship between scientific expertise and public understanding in frontier communities. His story showed that true leadership sometimes requires the courage to act on specialized knowledge, even when that action is misunderstood or opposed by the very people it is intended to protect. The economic disruption caused by Theodore's mine closures proved to be temporary, while the lives he saved were irreplaceable. Colorado's economy eventually diversified beyond mining, developing agricultural, manufacturing, and service industries that provided more stable employment opportunities than the boom and bust cycles that characterized mining communities. Federal mining safety regulations that were implemented as a result of the Colorado disaster became models for industrial safety legislation in other sectors of the American economy. Theodore's emphasis on preventing disasters through proactive scientific assessment rather than responding to accidents after they occurred became a fundamental principle of modern safety management. The seismic monitoring equipment that Theodore had used to detect underground instability evolved into sophisticated systems that are now used to predict earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and other geological disasters throughout the world. His pioneering work in applied geology contributed to scientific advances that continue to protect human lives and property more than a century after his death. Workers' rights organizations cited Theodore's example as evidence that scientific experts had moral obligations to protect workers even when that protection conflicted with employer interests or economic pressures. His willingness to sacrifice his career for worker safety became a rallying point for labor advocates who argued that industrial safety should take precedence over profit maximization. Environmental protection movements that emerged in the early 20th century also drew inspiration from Theodore's example, arguing that scientific experts had responsibilities to protect natural resources and prevent environmental destruction even when such protection required economic sacrifices. His holistic approach to geological assessment became a model for environmental impact studies that are now required for major industrial projects. The memorial established in Theodore's honor at the site of the Consolidated Silver Mine collapse includes excerpts from his final report, written just days before the disaster occurred. His words serve as a permanent reminder of the courage required to speak truth to power and the importance of scientific integrity in protecting human life and natural resources. Theodore Blackwood's legacy extended far beyond the specific lives he saved through his controversial mine closures. His example demonstrated that true heroism sometimes requires individuals to accept public condemnation and professional destruction in order to protect others from dangers they cannot see or understand. His story proved that scientific knowledge carries moral responsibilities that transcend personal and economic interests. The mining inspector, who was called a saboteur, showed that destruction can sometimes be the highest form of protection, and that the most important victories are often achieved by preventing disasters rather than responding to them. His courage in the face of overwhelming opposition became a model for experts in every field who must choose between popular acceptance and scientific integrity. If you're enjoying these incredible, true stories of scientific courage and moral leadership, hit that subscribe button, because we've got many more tales of individuals who sacrificed everything to protect others waiting for you. Click on the video on your screen to hear another story about someone who discovered that true heroism sometimes requires destroying what others value most in order to save what matters most, proving that the greatest acts of preservation often look like acts of destruction until the whole truth is finally revealed.